Welcome to the Inside Scoop Live podcast, where indie authors get personal about their books, their writing, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt. Join me for some lively conversations with debut indie authors and seasoned veterans alike. It's a great place to find your next amazing read or even get inspired. So sit back and enjoy the show and let me know what you think. Well, hi everyone. Gary McGugan joins the show today to talk about his latest novel, When Power Fails. It's a corporate thriller where international business, organized crime, and cyber warfare collide as a major corporation faces existential threats during a high-stakes acquisition. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. Gary McGugan has always been drawn to reading and storytelling, though his passion for writing took a backseat during his 40-year corporate career. The demands of senior-level corporate positions left little room for serious writing until his retirement. Drawing from his extensive business background, McGugan crafts suspense thrillers set against the backdrop of multinational corporations. Since his 2016 debut novel, 3 Weeks Less a Day, he has maintained an annual publishing schedule, with his 8th book, When Power Fails, now available. Following the maxim to write about what one knows best, McGugan draws upon his experience in business, travel, and people. As an author, he shares his experiences, insights, and perspectives through suspense stories crafted to entertain readers worldwide, one reader at a time. You can learn more about Gary McGugan and his books at GaryDMcGuganBooks.com. Hi, Gary. How are you today? Welcome back to Inside Scoop Live.
Well, I'm very well, and I want to thank you for inviting me back. I always look forward to our conversations.
Me too. I'm always excited when your new books come out. Let's dig into your latest, When Power Fails. What is this story about, and what was your inspiration behind it?
When Power Fails tells a story of the conflict between a fictional major global company I call Multima Corporation and this nefarious organized criminal element I call the organization. And in this novel, I have Multima's CEO, Suzanne Simpson, trying to complete the biggest deal of her career. And she faces challenges with technology and people who have the potential to destroy everything that she's been working for. Readers of other novels in the Multima saga know that the organization is a perpetual threat. And in When Power Fails, this criminal outfit pulls out all its weapons with new twists and turns, and we travel the globe together as multiple characters plot a scheme that threatens Multima Corporation right to its core. Mm-hmm. And as for my inspiration, CEOs of large global corporations wield enormous power. But criminal outfits and organized crime also exert power and influence in various other ways. I like When Power Fails to tell a fictional story of what might happen when the two collide. I set out to help readers understand how easily such a battle might evolve, not only in the story, but in the real world. And after reading When Power Fails, I kind of hope readers will be more alert to how organized crime might influence some of the companies they deal with or work for or buy products from. I'd like folks to get a sense of why we should all be a little concerned.
Yeah. I say this every time, but I love When Power Fails. For me, this one is like the most intense. And maybe it's the timing of everything, but I really like how you bring the headline news into your stories. And your protagonist, Suzanne Simpson, is one of my favorites, as you know, and seems like you give her more and more challenges with every novel. What sparked the idea for this particular corporate takeover storyline?
Well, in addition to being an author, I'm also an active investor. So I actually watch the business news and movements in the stock market quite closely. And I actually quite amazed at how often dramatic movements in company share values are the result of financing complications or technology glitches. And sometimes it may just be purely accidental. But when these occur, it doesn't take me long to imagine other plausible alternative scenarios, and they make a good story.
Yeah. It feels like as an author, you find potential stories in unexpected places. Has that changed how you experience like everyday events, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I'm often quite surprised myself at where ideas come from for the stories. I think I've shared with you in previous conversations, I love to walk and try to walk every day for, somewhere between an hour and two. And during those walks, I just think. And I'm amazed at what I think about that may lead me to a storyline.
Yeah.
And it could be something that I'm tweaking from on the news that day, and or it could be something I read, or it could be just a mischievous social media post. But I get all kinds of ideas.
Yeah, yeah. I heard an interview on NPR and I'm not exactly sure what the question was, but the answer was, it's getting harder and harder to find a plausible place to bury a body these days.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that.
So it just made me think, I wonder where the authors I work with get their storylines from. But now Suzanne discovers that Jefferson's Stores has deeper ties to the Yakuza than initially apparent. How does this revelation complicate her acquisition plans?
Well, it complicates them to a great extent. Once she learned that the Japanese mafia not only once owned the company she was buying, she found an additional complication when her chief of security discovered that the nasty folks in that criminal outfit may have sabotaged its subsidiary's technology system. And what she was trying to buy was a subsidiary of a company owned by the Yakuza. And by them corrupting the technology, they had the possibility of tearing down Multima Corporation's entire operating system, effectively putting them out of business until they got it fixed.
A bit of a tight spot, even for Suzanne.
Exactly, exactly.
She also faces a potential $6 billion loan negotiation. How did you craft the financial intricacies of such a high stakes deal?
Well, we all know that large companies like Multima use very experienced consultants and bankers to find willing lenders. And in Suzanne's case, she used what she thought was a very reliable source, one of the members of her board of directors, and himself, the CEO of a major bank. So she, in good faith, listened to the advice that he gave her.
Mhm.
And in When Power Fails, I describe how such a deal might take form and some of the risks if there is a last minute hiccup. It can suddenly get rather messy.
Yeah. Of course, she depends on her leadership skills and her wonderful just management style to handle the pressure. But like I said in the beginning, I mean, it's intense and she has her biggest challenge yet.
Yeah, I think I've had comments back from several readers that share your observation that this is the most intense and quickest pace. And of course, as a suspense writer, that's the sort of message I'd like to hear.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Now, the planned cyber attack in the story is described as potentially the biggest coordinated security assault in history. What went into developing this particular threat scenario?
Well, we have to remember that even organized crime is imperfect. And in the case of the Yakuza, the sort of the Japanese mafia, they actually ran into a particular financial problem that they had to work quickly to resolve. And basically, the relationship between the Yakuza and its US subsidiary was the need to raise cash. And as we watched the thought process of the leadership, we could see how an embittered seller, like the Yakuza, might eventually seek some satisfaction by crippling the buyer after they got their money. And in this story, some in the Yakuza and the organization already started dreaming about an opportunity to seize the company they had sold once again
Hmm.
and add Multima Corporation in as a bonus prize. So these are not nice people we're dealing with in this story.
No, it's not. It really brings the depth to your antagonists, and it's how like they're not always thinking just one step ahead, but they're thinking about the long game. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's true in the case of both the corporation and the criminal elements.
Mm,
They have a common theme of not only thinking for today, but having a long-term plan as well.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, the shadow reemerges and adds another layer of complexity to the plot. What made you decide to bring this character back into the story?
Well, I love the shadow. You may remember that we had a novel titled A Slippery Shadow. And in that story, I never entirely revealed who the shadow actually was. Now, some people link the comments in the story to calls traced to the US White House and surmised a certain former president or someone close to him might be the shadow.
Hmm.
And with the US election taking place as I was writing the story, and at about the same time it was going to be released to the public, I thought it might be a good time to give the shadow a little bit of a cameo role in When Power Fails. But in the story, we soon learn it won't be a significant role because the shadow was already too busy with the election to bother with a comparatively small fish like Multima.
Oh, well, he may have cause for a reappearance soon.
Well, you never know. I sense that I'll probably work the shadow back into a story at some time in the future.
So the plot also involves potential human trafficking from developing nations. What led you to incorporate this dark element into the framework of a corporate thriller?
As an author, I think my first responsibility is to make a story entertaining. And certainly when I set out to write When Power Fails, my goal throughout the story was to make it as entertaining as possible. And human trafficking is not entertainment. There's no doubt
Mm,
about that. But human trafficking is an unfortunate reality with organized crime. And it's a case not only in the United States or Canada, it's a case right around the globe.
mhm.
And rather recently, we've also learned that there have been some direct connections to the senior management of some larger corporations, particularly as it relates to human trafficking. So we probably can assume that there was some connection to organized crime there as well. And When Power Fails explores some of the ways human trafficking might seep into the organized crime world and ways it might also impact the corporate world, either directly or indirectly.
Hmm. When power fails, it just couldn't be more timely in so many aspects of it. It's like you were looking into the future and you've pulled all this stuff and put it into a nice little book for everyone.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. Your background in corporate leadership clearly influences your writing. Which real world experience would you say most significantly shape your fictional narratives?
Well, let me say, first of all, I had a wonderful experience. A lot of people get down on corporations and talk negatively about their experiences. Mine weren't. I had lots of great experiences, and I take great pride in the fact that when I retired from corporate life, I had 10,000 names in my contact list.
Mm,
So I met a tremendous number of people. I met them in various places around the world. And of course, I was able to glean little bits of information from a variety of people. And the last 20 years of my career focused on commercial lending.
mm.
My roles were varied, and I had the opportunity to work on three separate continents. So let me just say that I saw and experienced enough of the real world anomalies through my contacts, through my exposure to the industry and geographic coverage to really augment my already active imagination quite accurately.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, goodness. Now, I guess a part of this also shaped your vision of Suzanne's leadership style, particularly with her kind of a subtle yet commanding presence. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think Suzanne's been one of my favorite characters right from the beginning. And one of the reasons for that is that in my corporate experience, I had the opportunity to observe many different styles, as I said, meeting thousands of people.
Hmm.
I try to make Suzanne's style reflect her fundamental respect for others, first of all, her decisiveness, and her willingness to act when needed. But on the other hand, I wanted to appear much more human and I wanted to reflect her rather grounded sense of humility, as she likes to recognize equally both her failures and successes. And one of the characteristics I've always admired in leaders is a genuine desire to learn from every mistake. And I try to impart that to Suzanne in each of the novels.
It makes her a very likable protagonist. Just that sense of humility, as you said, her
Mhm.
willingness to make a mistake and own up to it. And then, okay, I've learned from there and let's move on. I really
Yeah.
enjoy that about her character. Yeah.
Good, good.
Yeah. Now, Suzanne has a relationship with Serge, one of her business partners, and it creates an interesting power dynamic. What influenced your portrayal of their personal and professional partnership?
Yeah, they're an interesting couple, no question. Maybe for listeners, I should explain that, of course, Suzanne, as we know, is the CEO of the company, and Serge is actually her live in lover and chief security officer.
Mhm.
So, first of all, we have her cavorting with a subordinate. And the idea of pairing a corporate CEO with a former leadership in law enforcement really intrigued me. Many of their leadership qualities are similar, but some are radically different, such as a willingness, and in the case of Serge, maybe even a passion to follow rules. Or in the case of Suzanne, maybe not strictly following the expected norms and doing things like cavorting with a subordinate. I like creating a healthy tension below the surface of their otherwise very amorous working and personal relationships.
I like how it does show us the human side of Suzanne as well
Mm,
as her
mm,
professional portrayal. Yeah.
right, right.
Now, on the other side, we have Fidelia Morales as the leader of the organization, and she faces both external threats and internal treachery. What complexities did you want to explore through her character?
Well, I think it would be fair to say that I tried to make Fidelia about as complex a character as one can imagine. First of all, leading a criminal outfit isn't easy for anyone. And of course, I imagine it's even more challenging for a woman.
Hmm.
So I try to create a woman who reflects those realities and is a mixture of very high intelligence, power, and vulnerability all at the same time. Fidelia brings an interesting personal background. She's Puerto Rican. She has a history of childhood sex abuse from a very young age, but she has enough smarts to graduate from Columbia University in New York and serve as a lawyer till she found it just stifling and boring. Then she went off to become a prostitute, then a madame for a prostitution outfit, and finally the global head of the organization. So she is a very complex woman, and I think very interesting to follow us in the stories.
Absolutely. You look up Jack of all trades in the dictionary, you see a picture of her.
Good analogy.
From a lawyer to a prostitute to leading a criminal organization. Wow.
just gentle evolution.
Yeah, that's right. Oh. Now, you also have some interesting secondary characters. I want to talk a little bit about Gordon Goodfellow and Amber Chan. They significantly impact the plot in this story. How do you develop these supporting roles to enhance the main narrative?
Well, mainly I create an illicit love affair, which leads to a lot of other complications. Gordon Goodfellow is the Multima Supermarkets business leader, the president there. And Amber Chan is a subordinate of his, and she's transferred from a management role in China to help him integrate the new acquisition that they made from the Yakuza in Japan into the Multima Supermarkets organization.
Mhm.
Both actually get into situations well over their heads, and it gets complicated. Now, I think the scenarios I create for both characters may stretch the limits of credibility, but I think they stay real enough to remain plausible, even if perhaps they're a little bit unlikely. I think they add a lot to the story.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so too. They added a little bit of a different twist for you, it seems like.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep.
and like we talked about earlier, it's getting harder and harder to find a place to bury a body these days.
Exactly.
That's just good entertainment. Now, trust and morality emerge as central themes, with Suzanne often placing faith in the wrong people. How does this exploration of corporate ethics drive the story?
Well, first of all, as you know, I like Suzanne, and I don't want to be too hard on her. I think she trusts people in a very reasonable way based on reasonable information that's accessible to a corporate leader. Things like a resume and things like observation of characteristics on the job and recommendations from individuals and so on. But we have to remember that, like any other CEO, she can't control how those people may change and evolve over time due to circumstances often totally unrelated to the business world.
Mm.
It may be a family issue. It may be some sort of dalliance. It could be any sort of thing. But I think Suzanne's ethics throughout are always quite stable. We just have that one little weakness for cavorting with a subordinate. But the issues that I introduce in the story for other major characters are well outside the reasonable expectations of most corporate leaders. So I think Suzanne in the stories actually is a little hard on herself sometimes because she seems to feel that she should have been able to foresee it. And I'm not sure that was always possible.
Yeah, that's true. She does seem to be a little hard on herself. And she provides a fair assessment and is not quick to judge, is not based on first impressions or anything like that. So,
I think very objective, a very objective personality.
mhm, mhm. Your story, as with all of your novels, spans multiple international locations. How does your firsthand experience with these settings enhance your ability to bring them to life?
Well, I think that the firsthand experience probably is crucial to bringing them to life. In each of my stories, I try to mention some fact or feature or location that most tourists to the location I'm talking about might not normally see. But I learned from firsthand experience, not only visiting there, but in some of these places I've actually lived for an extended period of time.
Mhm.
Use an example, the sushi dinner in Japan in 3 weeks less a day. That comes to mind as one that most tourists to Japan wouldn't have the opportunity to experience. Or the 5,000 plus steps that are hidden on the sides of the mountains surrounding Dubrovnik that I discovered and talk about in Contention. Or even simply the little route Howard Knight followed to escape from the airport in Barbados in the A Web of Deceit story.
Mm.
And none of these were major factors in the story. They weren't any turning points or anything like that. But I think they did become interesting tidbits that many readers enjoy and actually mention in their emails and comments to me from time to time.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like sometimes I want to place you as a character because I see your experiences come out in the story, like you said, the 5,000 plus hidden steps, and I know about your love of exercise and your walking. And so your firsthand experiences show up on the page, just giving an incredible authenticity to the stories. Like the sushi dinner in Japan you just talked about. Do you write these things down like, "Oh, I'm gonna talk about this dinner in a story one day," or does it just come to you from memory? I mean, how does all of these things that you experience come to end up in a story?
Well, the sushi dinner that we're talking about, the time I had that very entertaining dinner, writing a book was probably the farthest thing from my mind.
Yeah.
I didn't make notes, I didn't record or anything like that. And I should point out that it was about 45 years ago as well.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's not something that happened recently. I'm fortunate I have a fairly good memory. And especially when I encounter unique experiences or unique sights, I simply seem to be able to tuck them away and at some time in the future bring them back out again. And that sushi dinner that we're talking about, that actually took place with a guest that I was taking to a dinner with about a dozen Japanese people. And it was a writer for a motorcycle magazine who was my guest. And he was just shocked to see the salmon still quivering on the plate before we served dinner.
I love that. Like I said, authenticity, right?
Yeah, but it stuck with me.
Yeah, I guess that would. Now, the Yakuza's involvement adds an international criminal element, of course. What kind of research went into portraying this organization authentically?
Well, I didn't do a lot of formal research. I'll say that very candidly, but we were just talking about my dinner in Japan a few seconds ago. And of course, my first trip to Japan was in 1976.
Mm.
So I learned about the Yakuza and its involvement with the pachinko parlors during that first visit. And while I worked for the Canadian subsidiary of a large Japanese corporation, virtually all of my senior management colleagues over that time, and that was a period of more than 13 years, were Japanese.
Mm.
So I had lots of informal conversations. I had lots of conversations where these folks would refer me to articles and stories that had been written when I asked about the Yakuza and so on. During those intervening years, had a good opportunity to learn about a little bit about how the Yakuza operates. So
Mhm.
I don't consider myself an expert by any means, but I learned a fair amount about how Japanese organized crime operates over the past few years.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting to learn about things like that.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about technology. When
Mm.
Power Fails features sophisticated cybersecurity threats and network vulnerabilities. How do you research and develop these complex technological elements?
Well, my research is probably not much different from my readers. I read newspaper articles. I read articles attached to posts on social media and the occasional article in a technology magazine. And of course, today we're inundated with a flood of information about artificial intelligence and how it infiltrates companies and organizations every day. So I get a lot of my information just by being aware of what's going on in the world. But I think I first became fascinated with technology when one of my employers appointed me to head up a committee of technology users to advise that company's IT department on changes it should undertake and prioritize to improve the user's experience. Now, that was more than 20 years ago, 29 years ago, I believe. And my fascination with technology has never dimmed during that time. So, although I'm no expert technologist, I really do like to keep aware of what's going on and think about some of the possibilities.
Hmm. It's amazing to me how far we've come in 29 plus years, you know. I remember computers used to take up entire rooms in corporations, you know,
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Digital warfare plays a central role. What challenges did you face in making these technical aspects both authentic and understandable for readers?
Well, I think anytime we try to delve into an area of technology, as writers, we take a risk. There could be some people that we lose if we're not very careful. Personally, I try to use just a regular vocabulary. I try to avoid acronyms and buzzwords as much as possible. And I also try to describe the expected results more than the methods used to get those results, because I
Mm.
think that's where we lose people. And I think most readers can feel comfortable with that approach, even if technology is not their favorite subject.
Yeah, that's true. I don't need to know how you got there, but just show me the end result. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think there's a risk in using certain acronyms and buzzwords because that will go out of style. And then all of a sudden you have a dated story. Yeah.
Exactly.
When Power Fails also explores the complex factors behind rising grocery costs, another headline event, from global market shifts to climate change effects. What motivated this deep dive into industry challenges?
Well, first of all, let me reemphasize again. I consider entertaining my reader as my first responsibility. And to me, that's always paramount. But I think how I tell a story can also give an opportunity to explore issues or concerns that I think readers might want to think about and perhaps develop their own concern. I think hunger, food prices, the concentration of ownership of food chains, and the potential influence that organized crime could have on all of those elements may become one of the most critical issues our global society faces in the coming years.
Hmm.
I'd like to create an awareness of the potential for that hardship so we might avoid following that path and becoming victims of the concentration and wealth and power of criminal elements. I think the potential for criminal involvement is very real, and I think the challenge is very real.
Yeah, absolutely. You reveal how multiple factors affect supermarket operations globally. How does this industry insight enhance the story's authenticity?
Well, my very first job as a teenager in high school was in the supermarket industry.
Oh,
And later, I had a management role with one of Canada's largest supermarkets. So I've always enjoyed learning new things about the food industry, the supermarket industry. And in my stories, I try to show the link between specific factors in a way that readers can understand and relate. For an example, when organized criminals buy up extensive farmland from retiring farmers, that has an impact.
mm,
And how they might influence the price of crops or herds of animals or manage the availability of raw food products to engineer higher prices. These are all very much within the power of the criminal elements if they take ownership of any of those components on the way up the food chain.
this was such an interesting element to your story. I really enjoyed this part.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you. I thought it was an important bit to work in.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, your pacing alternates between boardroom tension and physical danger. How do you balance these different types of suspense in your stories?
Well, fundamentally, a technique that I use when I'm writing all of my stories is I try to tell the story from three different characters' points of view. So we've got fairly distinct points of view. And one boardroom scene, for example, might be from Suzanne's perspective. Another one could be from a subordinate's perspective. And I use this as a technique to help increase the tension. I also like to use dialogue extensively in boardroom scenes because I think that makes a reader a part of the discussions rather than simply reading about what they talked about.
Mm,
And scenes for characters like Fidelia are very different. They could involve a component of danger, or they could even be just informal settings like an apartment, a walk in the woods, or even a chat in a flight on her private jet.
yeah. I think it gives a lot of texture to the story.
I think it gives a more rounded aspect to the story.
Yeah. Your corporate settings often mask deeper dangers. Also, what fascinates you about this intersection of legitimate business and criminal enterprise?
Well, I think mainly I worry that as the concentration of ownership of legitimate businesses intensifies, the more likely it becomes that criminal enterprises will look to find opportunities to infiltrate and control those corporations.
Mm,
And today, for an example, in both the US and Canada, six or seven massive companies supply 85% of the retail food market. It's
mm,
a huge concentration.
wow.
When we think about media, a handful of billionaire investors control virtually all the newspapers, TV, and radio networks. And that's a pattern that's come about over the past 50 years. And I think the practice will accelerate during the coming 50 years if we don't recognize the concentration problems and take some sort of action to counter it.
Mhm.
And I think we should expect organized crime, as it does throughout history. We should expect organized crime to seize some of those concentrated ownership positions eventually by both legal and illegal means.
Mm, it's scary.
There's a danger.
Yeah. Wow. So, what techniques do you use to maintain freshness while building on established storylines?
Well, I've always tried since I was actually a very young person to just learn continuously. And I do continue to learn. I read as much as possible and as widely as possible. And of course, as you know, I continue to travel. Within the next few days, I'll actually leave for a month in the Azores. I've never had an opportunity to go there before, and I'll explore an island or two for about a month. And that month will give me a good opportunity to learn about a new location and a different culture. Again, in January, I'm going to leave for 3 months in Asia, and I'm going to explore 4 countries while I'm there. Now, I've been to 2 or 3 of those countries before, but I'm going to visit areas that I haven't been to previously, and a couple of these are fairly large countries.
Mm,
And so each one of these will be another learning experience for me, and I have no doubt those learnings and experiences will eventually work into a story or two.
Oh, nice, nice. It's about to get cold in Canada, right? It's time for Gary to move on out.
I work so much better in a warm environment.
Oh, that's great. So I got to ask, what's next for you? Are you working on another book in the series?
Well, I know you need to ask the question, and it's a good question, but you might not like my answer. During that Azores visits that's coming up, one of my main objectives is to think about that future and what I'm going to do for writing and what direction I want to pursue. I've got 3 or 4 different possibilities, and number 9 in the Multima saga is one of those possibilities. But I don't think I want to make that decision till I'm out hiking on those countless trails that they have in the beautiful Azores Islands. And when I get down there, now I'll start down a path while I'm in Asia.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, options. You have lots of options. I love it. Yeah.
Try to have.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for joining me again on the show and giving us an update about your latest novel, When Power Fails. It's been a pleasure as always.
Well, I thank you. It's been great chatting with you again, and I enjoy the opportunity to chat with you each time. Thanks for your invitation today.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Gary McGugan, author of When Power Fails. To learn more about Gary and his work, visit his website at garydmcguganbooks.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.